Okay, what is our topic for today? Welcome everyone. Hi, how are you? Any comments before I start? Questions? Good, we'll dive straight in. We have a lot of content today, so I don't know if we'll get through all of it. We'll see. This is a really interesting topic that I was thinking of maybe doing it over 2 classes, but decided just to limit it to 1, unfortunately. And the topic is, of course, the future of work. What is going to happen to working class and non-working class people as AI starts to come for our jobs? Okay, so that's sort of the general topic of it. And the idea today is we're going to look at it through a specific lens. We're going to start with talking about AI and replacement. So this idea of AI replacing different kinds of positions in the workforce, different kinds of job opportunities. And after that, so while we're looking at that, we'll try and think, is this a good thing? Is this necessarily a bad thing? And we'll discuss that a bit. Then we'll take 2 examples of types of work that can be seen in the future, or case studies for what AI might do to work. One, we'll look at data work, and we'll discuss what that means exactly, behind the scenes of developing an AI system. And the second, if we have time, we'll look at workplace surveillance. So we did a whole session on surveillance in society. Here we'll do a sort of close-up look on using these types of methods and tools within the workplace and how that shifts the traditional structure of work in that specific place. So we'll see if we have time for number 3. If not, we'll just stick with these first 2. Okay, however the discussion goes. Okay, so let's start off. We're looking at AI and replacement. In order to do that, I brought us a nice video to start us off, talk about new and emerging types of uses for AI. And let's start off by talking about the food industry. And let's see this nice video about that. And we'll talk about burger bots. Okay, here we go.
If I walk just a few blocks from this office, I can find a robot that will make me a latte, serve me a quinoa bowl, and now there's one that will make me a custom made-to-order hamburger. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it. San Francisco is a hub of food and of technology, so having new businesses that want to techify their restaurant concept makes a lot of sense. But when I talked to my coworkers about it, they had 2 distinct opinions about robots making their food. One, I think it sounds cool, I would definitely go. And the other.
So how does that affect people working in the city?
Both of these opinions are completely justified, but that jobs one is where things get complicated. Typically, robotic restaurants employ plenty of people. They're just doing different jobs than before. So instead of flipping burgers or making pizzas, they're stocking the machine, greeting customers, and just keeping everything in working order. But I wanted to see this for myself. So we are going to head over to Creator, that robotic burger place that I was telling you about, and I am going to see how robots might impact the future of how we order food.
So Creator is a new type of restaurant, one that has one of the most advanced culinary instruments. So this baby back there, it makes literally the freshest burger ever. We slice tomatoes, pickles, onions, the bun to order, but my favorite part actually grinds the meat to order, which means we make an amazing burger and it's $6.
This robot isn't what I had imagined. Instead of a mechanical arm flipping burgers as we've seen in the past, Creator has built a 14-foot all-in-one burger machine that uses 350 sensors and 20 computers. It takes 5 minutes to make a burger start to finish. And with 2 machines, the Creator team can make 130 burgers per hour here at their first location.
So in designing the system, we have a principle where we want to design a device that would meet nature where it is and not kind of make food conform to a robot. But that caused all kinds of engineering challenges because food is so different. So for instance, with the hamburger buns, each one is slightly different size. And so on the bun system alone, there's 7 different laser distance sensors that are watching every little aspect of it, seeing where the buns are, how they're moving, and so forth. A burger is a composed dish, which means you need to be able to accurately control where everything is and where it's going and how it kind of comes together. And for that, we had to build a device with a pretty impressive amount of dexterity. So we didn't want something that would make just one kind of burger. We looked at this sort of like a platform for different recipes. We wanted as much culinary creativity as possible.
There is also a proper kitchen where employees prep burgers and make sauces and sides, but since the robots cook and assemble the burgers, Creator needed less space, meaning less rent, which leaves more room to invest in their ingredients.
So one of the great things about our operation is because it's so efficient, we spend so much more on the cost of ingredients, which definitely comes through in the flavor. So as an example, the beef is whole chunks of chuck and brisket. It's steak, it's pasture raised, there's no antibiotics, no hormones.
So how did it taste? Well, I can confidently say that it was the best Excel burger that I've ever had, but I am not a food expert, so I asked Ellen from Eater, who's one of my coworkers, what she thought about the burger.
I think it's a good burger. It's meaty, it has fresh toppings, the bun is nice. It's the freshest possible burger, and there's way fewer times that people are touching your burger. So think about another restaurant where every single thing that you're eating on the burger has been touched by multiple people. In this case, the bun goes in the tube, it gets shot through the machine, it flies the sauce, it cuts vegetables to go on the top really freshly and makes it, and at the end they hand it to you in a box. And at that point, no one has touched it except for you.
So yeah, robotic restaurants are cool and interesting, but there's still that whole jobs thing. It turns out that the average cook makes $30,000 a year salary, and that also happens to be the mean average rent of a single bedroom in San Francisco. Not a one-bedroom apartment, just a single bedroom.
San Francisco is notoriously an expensive place to live, and that is now creeping into every part of our daily lives. So that includes restaurants, of course, but specifically it's making it hard for restaurant workers to even have a place to live here. So people are edging out into surrounding areas. That makes commuting long and expensive. It makes it hard to even want to work in the city. A lot of restaurants are experiencing a big struggle to find people who are even willing to do it. So in some cases, robots can kind of pick up that slack and do those repetitive tasks that humans don't really need to do.
As it stands today, there are very few restaurants testing this technology, so there's little threat of robots taking over anytime soon. But I can see a world where robotic restaurants becomes a thing. With robots on the line, owners can afford to pay their staff and make ends meet, and the math just might make more sense.
Even if you can find staff, we've got like very expensive permitting processes that go on forever, hugely expensive rents, which are not going down anytime soon. And then minimum wage is also rising. So people who are operating restaurants have to pay their staff more. They have a whole lot more overhead, and that's really reflected in the menu prices, which is part of the reason people are finding it so expensive to dine out in San Francisco.
And to date, the robot restaurants we've looked at here in San Francisco are charging around 20% less than their human-powered competition. And in there lies the hope that maybe, just maybe, these robots are a solution.
And it is an exciting future. When you think of all the stuff you can do with better technology in the restaurant space, which frankly hasn't seen a lot of improvement over the past several decades, my expectation is that we're going to see some pretty exciting new dishes coming out, maybe even new cuisines, using the dexterity that you get from some pretty advanced instrumentation in your kitchen.
A future with more robotic restaurants might not be all that bad. We'll have to wait and see. What do you think about robot restaurants? Be sure.
So, what do you think about robot restaurants? Okay, yeah, I mean, it's really cool. I would love to see that machine in action because I like gadgets and seeing how it works. But yeah, as a social phenomena, maybe I'm also skeptical. But let's see in other areas. So we see that AI systems, robotics are being integrated in a huge variety of domains of work. Here we see robots being used in agriculture. One of the claims was for a long time is that robots don't have the dexterity to deal with delicate fruits, like with tomatoes, for instance, and that would never happen, but we're seeing that already. That transition is also taking place. So the leaps are coming quite quickly. Then we're seeing also, of course, outside of agriculture, we'll see it in industry, in creation, in smart workplaces, in smart factories, where everything is done autonomously or automated, right, to a certain degree, from car manufacturing to different kinds of sorting of boxes and that kinds of stuff. And then we see other types of implications that we've discussed throughout the semester. So I'm not going to be touching on them very deeply, but we see like in hospitals, we're seeing the use of robotics and AI systems. Here, I wanted to present a robot that's lifting a patient, but I got this kind of very weird and scary thing. But let's imagine that this is a nice scenario, right? He's very friendly. Let's think that way. Okay. And we see, so like programs like ChatGPT can already write code at a very, very high level. So this sort of domain of work is slowly changing. Here we see a human watching ChatGPT code. For some reason, it's also happening on his head. But maybe that's an advanced way to do it. We're seeing in education this transition, right? So here's an article that came out just a few weeks ago. Texas is replacing thousands of human exam graders with AI. So let's see the main idea. The Texas Tribune reports an automated scoring engine that utilizes natural language processing is being rolled out by the Texas Education Agency to grade open-ended questions on the state of Texas assessment of academic readiness. The agency is expecting the system to save $15 to $20 million per year by reducing the need for temporary human scores, with plans to hire under 2,000 graders this year compared to 6,000 the previous year. So they went from 6,000 to 2,000 by implementing this new AI scoring system. And what is lost along the way, we've spoken about that throughout the semester entirely, right? So we're not going to talk about this now. We know sort of the dangers behind this. But these are sort of day-to-day uses that this is being put towards. Now, I brought here a question that came up in one of the discussion questions you sent me by Alicia, and I thought it was relevant to this topic. So the question was, could it be that humans in the future might not need to learn some of the things that we now do learn in schools, right? As that would be the AI's task. So, I mean, this is a question that has come up often in my mind, and I think it's a natural question to ask, right? Throughout history, as technology sort of has made certain processes redundant, we've lost the skills to engage with that. I mean, I have no idea how to wire something in my house. If I had to fix like a microwave, or I have no clue how that's working even, right? It's insane, the lack of our understanding of these tools that we use every single day, right? So yes, I think this is a deep question. What do you guys think about this? Is this a positive, a negative? It's sort of the fact that we do not need to use certain skills, right? I mean, often this has been thought as a good thing. Obviously, there's a downside to it. What are your intuitions? But yeah, what is the limit, right? We saw throughout the semester that AI is slowly creeping into the normative domain, into the domain of those evaluative questions. What is beautiful? What is good, right? If those questions also become sort of delegated over, yeah, there's a big question, what's left sort of to learn, right? There's an interesting philosopher that it just comes to my mind now called Rancière, so a French philosopher. And I don't know if I mentioned this throughout the semester, but this came up now. So he had this idea of the ignorant schoolmaster. This was a book that was written. And the idea of the ignorant schoolmaster is that the job of an educator is to teach what the educator doesn't know. So the ideal teacher for Rancière was the teacher, a teacher who teaches you to play the piano even though he doesn't know how to play the piano, right? Or a teacher that teaches you German even though she doesn't speak German herself. And the idea behind that, there's something very beautiful about it, is that teaching is sort of a process of not passing on knowledge, but rather giving skills, right? And if knowledge is not the task, but rather skills, then I, as a teacher, don't need to actually know the thing that I'm teaching. And so, I mean, again, the positive spin of this question is that, well, education will be education for values, not education for knowledge. Knowledge you can either won't be necessary or you can gain it on your free time. But we'll teach, I don't know, egalitarianism, liberalism, we'll teach humanitarian ideas, and so on and so forth. So again, this might be a good thing, might be a bad thing. Okay. Let's look at another example as we are delegating systems away. I brought here a second video for us to watch, and this is sort of all the service industry and what Google is trying to do in the service industry. And it's a funny example. Let's see what you guys think about that.
As I said earlier, our vision for our assistant is to help you get things done. It turns out a big part of getting things done is making a phone call. You may want to get an oil change schedule, maybe call a plumber in the middle of the week, or even schedule a haircut appointment. We think AI can help with this problem. So let's go back to this example. Let's say you want to ask Google to make you a haircut appointment on Tuesday between 10 and noon. What happens is the Google Assistant makes the call seamlessly in the background for you. So what you're going to hear is the Google Assistant actually calling a real salon to schedule the appointment for you. Let's listen.
How can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book a haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd. Sure, give me 1 second. Sure, what time are you looking for around? At 12 p.m. We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15. Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.? Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for? Just a woman's haircut for now. Okay, we have it 10 o'clock. 10 a.m. is fine. Okay, what's your first name? The first name is Lisa. Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd. Okay, great. Thanks. Great. Have a great day. Bye.
Okay, so what do we think of that? Might be another step towards automating certain functions. Here we talked last week and over the last few weeks about identity, about imitation, about recreating humans. Here we're seeing the use of voice softwares to imitate a real life person. What we talked about as counterfeit people perhaps, right? And the person in the hair salon has no idea that they're talking with an AI system in this case, right? Now that might raise some ethical questions and challenges in and of itself. But what about the very fact that maybe personal assistance is another one of those jobs that can go into the trash bin of history? What do we think about that? You're raising a fair point, and we'll touch on that as we look at the types of jobs that are created. I just wonder sort of, as a response to that idea, it used to be sort of a popular notion that poverty is somehow the fault of the person, right? You're to blame for being poor. You're not a hard worker. You're not incentivized enough. And I think today this notion has died away. I think today we have a firmer understanding that socio-economical structures force people into certain categories, regardless of how well-intentioned they are or how motivated they are. So I completely agree with what you're saying. We need a holistic solution as we try to sort of shape society in a sense. But then again saying, okay, I'm taking away the $2 an hour job from these poor people, maybe that's harming them. Yes, but maybe the right question is, why do we have $2 an hour jobs in the first place, right? Yeah, okay. Of course, I'm not saying you intended that, but just to bring that into larger context. Okay, and that, of course, brings us to the question of, are these processes leading us in the right direction? As we remove jobs, and bad jobs especially, right, from, are we going towards utopia? Now, this is the famous book by Thomas More, where he describes sort of this idea. He wasn't the first person to imagine a utopian sort of society, but nevertheless brought it into popular fashion. And sort of all those dystopian novels that we saw were very famous today and in the 20th century sort of come from the tradition of Thomas More as a response to his writings. Now the word utopia itself, for those of you who don't know, is actually, it's a joke sort of, it's ironic because it means nowhere. That's the literal definition of it, right? It's a Greek sort of combination. And so the idea is that the perfect society doesn't exist. That's sort of the meta level of it. And then that's the question. By eliminating work, are we bringing us towards this utopia, towards this ideal society? Here's another question that came up in your discussions. So Nicholas wrote this, and I thought this was interesting at this point. As AI integration leads to potential increases in leisure time, how can we address the risks of inequality and social isolation that might arise from reduced workplace interaction? What strategies should be in place to ensure that technological advancement in the workplace foster community rather than deepening divides and isolated individuals? So these are sort of themes that we've already, just here in the beginning of the class, we have already touched on these ideas. If we eliminate the work, what comes instead of it, right? A utopian society that does not have work in it might raise these questions, right? Social isolation, lack of community bonding. We need to provide alternatives to it as we create that. So what do we think about this idea? Yes, please. Well, let's add to that a bit. We'll add another layer to that. So in one of the readings that I recommended for this week, there's a book by John Danaher, a colleague and a brilliant legal theorist. And he wrote a book about utopia and flourishing. And in that book, he discusses sort of the two options that might come about as we remove work from our social existence. And what he envisions is two potential outputs of this once humans give up the cognitive niche. So this idea is, until this point in history, we have always controlled the cognitive side of our existence, right? We've been the masters of that. And sort of as AI is looming and is starting to spread, it is sort of taking over that area, right? The smart jobs are starting to disappear, not just the menial, repetitive labor tasks. And what he envisions is sort of that we can go in two different directions. We can go down the direction of the cyborg utopia, cyborgs being sort of the name of integration with machines, where humans and technology sort of merge together. Right? And we start transplanting chips into our bodies. We start sort of making ourselves stronger, faster, smarter through the use of technology. And the other path is we go down the path of the virtual utopia. We touched on an aspect of this over the last few weeks when we talked about illusions, we talked about the matrix. But the idea here is to actively and willingly go into the metaverse, right? In that kind of sense. So he envisions these two types of future. And maybe just a comment from you guys, just thinking about this. Which future would you be more drawn to? Towards the cyborg utopia? And as an example, you can imagine one extreme of that is like Darth Vader, right? A complete like robot human. And on the other side of that would be what's happening today. People are installing smart chips into their skin, right? I always had this dream that I could install an AirPod in my ear and never lose those tiny pods anymore. I thought that would be wonderful. I'd love that. People have scanners in their hands to open up the house doors, to control their cars, these kinds of stuff. Or we go down the virtual utopia, no work, UBI, universal basic income, and then all day long we just play games inside these machines. So which one is more appealing to you? So my debate with myself was whether to devote the entire class to this. And I thought, you know what, we did 3 classes now about theory and a bit abstract thought, and I thought, we're not going to go down this line. We'll talk more about real world, nowadays impact of this technology. I thought it would be a bit of a change from thinking about futuristic matrix style stuff. But this is my homage to Danaher, and we'll come back to his book when we talk about unemployment. Now in the real world, what's happening is stuff more like this. This is a picture about the Writers Guild strike in the US that happened last year. Basically they said that they will not be replaced by AI. That was the leading theme behind this. And let's see some of the ideas that were part of that talk. I don't know why the computer's not working well. Okay, one of the biggest fears is that with the help of AI, studios, movie studios, right, can churn out low quality screenplays and have only a handful of writers on retainer to polish these rough drafts into working scripts. And we've seen some of this happen. People are being fired and then rehired on a non-permanent basis in order to review the work created by AI. So the same work they used to do, now they are just sort of editors of it. And they're working as part-time workers rather than full-time writers. So this was something they were very, very concerned with. A smart ChatGPT fine-tuned on screenplays that will churn out these movie themes that are not very good, but then a few writers will come and make it a bit better by making slight improvements, and that'll be the future of the Writer Guild. They were very, very concerned with this, and similarly, they were concerned on the acting side of it. At the same time, the Actors Guild also went into strike as it came to light that the major studios were planning to scan extras' faces for one day's wage, and use their likeness for perpetuity. So instead of hiring extras for every scene, we would use CGI versions of them, essentially, in the background. What Bob Iger, one of the producers, and the heads of the major studios have seen was a future where AI-written screenplays can be turned into virtually rendered movies with digitally scanned actors. So why not? And we've already seen some actors sort of jump on this bandwagon and allow we talked about that, I think, with voices of singers, right? That their voice can be replicated and then people can create songs with their own voice. And the same thing sort of with actors. We would have a CGI version or a better scan of Bruce Willis, and we create millions of action movies where he's in his 30s and still sexy and nice, look, and everything's fine. And we don't need an Indiana Jones with an old Harrison Ford, right? Okay, we can keep him young and beautiful. Okay, so that's sort of the fears that people are having, right? And we talked about a lot of different examples. And now, of course, the question is this the future or not? So let's look at an argument which tries to explain that yes, we should anticipate technological unemployment. And here's how the argument is structured. So first of all, the basic argument goes like this. If technology can and will replace more and more forms of human work, and if there will be fewer and fewer alternative forms of work to which humans can migrate, then there will be technological unemployment. Fair enough. If and if and if. Okay, that's easy. Then this is coupled with number 2. Technology can and will replace more and more forms of work, and will do so in a way that results in fewer and fewer alternatives. Okay, we need to prove that point, but that would be the premise number 2, right? So if that happens, this is the if the if happens, then of course we arrive at technological unemployment. So the big question is, you always hear whenever anyone is talking about AI taking over the jobs, no, it will create a lot of new jobs instead. That's sort of the mantra that's going on. So let's see if that's a realistic expectation or not, according to this analysis of it. So we have the basic argument, I just spelled it out. If jobs are taken over and not enough jobs are recreated as a result, then we have technological unemployment. Now let's see the critique of this. Why is this not true? Well, first critique is what's known as the Luddite fallacy. Anyone know who the Luddites were? This is an old sort of, the 19th century, I think they came out, early 1800s. And they were in the UK, they objected to the implementation of technology in mills, okay? And they brought all these new types of mechanical instruments to sort of replace the mill workers. And what the Luddites did is they came and they burned down the mills, basically, as a result. They either broke the machines or burned down the mills. And then the British Army came, and there was a huge war around that. But basically, today we call a Luddite anyone who believes that we need to destroy the machines from taking away our jobs, right? Now, the Luddite fallacy is this idea that the displacement argument assumes a fixed static labor market, but in reality, technology will create new opportunities and new forms of work. So the Luddites were scared that they would have no more jobs, but we saw that there were a lot of other jobs that came from that. So it didn't pan out as they had feared. Historical evidence suggests that we have always found new forms of work, right? Throughout history, we've seen this. And the productivity effect and the complementary effect suggest that humans will be employed in complementary work. What do I mean by that? Well, complementary work means that we shift our focus. We go from doing what we originally did to different types of tasks. In this case here in this diagram, so task 1, we would do legal research, for instance, or document review. We would do schmoozing advising, right? Or we would do the arguing in a courtroom. So the things that the systems cannot do, although they do a lot in the background, it will create other tasks that we still can do. That's sort of the argument here. Now, what is the problems with the Luddite fallacy? So there are 4 sort of objections to that. First is that preliminary evidence on the net effect of robotization tend to show that this is not exactly the same as past iterations of this, right? That the early evidence is showing that the jobs that are being removed are not being replaced at the same rate, okay? So it's not a net sum zero game. Okay, a second issue is the accelerating change and the cycle of immiseration. Now, I'm not going to go into the cycle of immiseration exactly with the diagram, but what it means essentially is that as these technologies become more and more capable, they replace the types of jobs that cannot be recreated. So for instance, when I start taking away creative work, I would incentivize people to go and study more. But the problem with studying more, as we saw in the video in the beginning, is becoming more cost exorbitant. It's becoming less of a ticket that ensures a good life. And look what's happening in the US today. All the students are taking these huge, huge loans to study, and they end their academic studies without actually job prospects to pay back these loans. And they remain within this cycle of immiseration. And that's another factor as to why AI might not be able to replicate itself. Well, we might not be able to replicate the jobs that are being lost. Now, another issue, of course, is the general purpose nature of AI, right? That it's not limited to mill work or to different kinds of specific activities. We saw whole industries are likely going to be reshaped or even removed from human capacity. And soon we'll look at a few examples of that. And finally, the superstar market problem, right? New opportunities, but fewer jobs. So yes, there will be new jobs, but maybe 1 or 2 people can do them. How many AI supervisors do you need in a factory? You don't need the thousands of workers that you had before, right? So there are new jobs, just not as many perhaps. Okay, so that's sort of an objection to why the Luddite fallacy doesn't work in this case. And now there's another objection to the basic argument, which says that there's significant social and regulatory impediments to automation. Now, one of you wrote in one of the questions, I didn't bring that, or was it in one of the essays, I can't remember as I just scanned through them, that, well, we have to regulate to make sure that this doesn't happen. We have to actively sort of block these processes because of the problem of replacement and the jobs are not being created as much. The problem is that regulatory impediments are controlled by labor and are controlled by political incentives, and we're seeing that companies are de-incentivized from actually doing these transitions responsibly, right? If the goal is to maximize profit, then you're very much incentivized to ensure that your lobbyist blocks any types of legislation against this. So we have power dynamics in society that may create challenges here. Now against this, of course, a regular social impediment tend to be short-term or temporary, and it doesn't consider the desirability of automation. We said before, a lot of these jobs are dangerous. They are terrible jobs that are intended only to those migrants that don't have any other option to do in their life, right? So they're forced to do that. Automation is wonderful. It'll take away these horrible jobs. And as I said, we need to think about this in the larger context, but that's a powerful argument in and of itself, right? Remember in the past where there were children working as chimney sweepers, right? We think about all these weird types of jobs that don't exist anymore. And we think, oh, that's great. We don't want children to work as chimney sweepers, right? So in a few years, once robots do all the picking, we'll say, what were we thinking throughout history of putting human beings in these cotton fields for hours and hours and hours and being poisoned by these plants? So, okay, these types of questions. And finally, the last objection is that complete automation of work would be unsustainable. Capitalism depends on consumers. This is an argument against the unemployment. If we take away all the jobs, capitalism will collapse. That's the idea. And so something will fix itself within the system. And of course, again, this doesn't consider the desirability of automation, and we don't know where the breaking point is for capitalism. So today we're seeing that income inequality has reached a peak like never before, right? Where the top 1% own more or less between 30 and 50% of the world's wealth, okay? And the bottom 90% own about 10% of the world's wealth. So we're seeing huge economic disparities, huge income inequality. This is well known, this is well documented for years. That's nothing new. But we never know when will be the breaking point. How much can we survive with this as this inequality grows and grows and grows and grows? When will the workers rise and burn down the factories? We can't tell that in advance. And perhaps we can survive also this AI unemployment wave. Just more people might suffer, a few more people will be rich, and that's the end of it. Okay. So these are sort of the ideas behind it. And now, of course, when we're looking at this entire picture, what we need to do is ask ourselves, is it desirable? Is it something that we wish would happen, the elimination of work? And so I brought Anna's question here to sort of think about this. And it reads like this. In a world where AI has taken over the work of work and very few human jobs remain available, how will people find their sense of purpose? We mentioned that here before, right? And contribute in the world. Despite many people today getting this purpose from their jobs, is it fundamentally necessary for us to have a job occupation to feel fulfilled? So Anna, you want to maybe explain in the context of what we just discussed? That's sort of what we're being sold, right? That's the positive side of it, right? No more work, no more doing these terrible things that you hate and still getting the money. Yeah, that's excellent. If that's the case, yeah. Okay, let's look at a few of the problems with work and sort of understand what we mean by work, because that's sort of been an underlying issue here. Now, I'm going to look at John Danaher's, again, explanation on this specific notion. So he defines work as any activity performed in exchange for an economic reward. Okay, work is not what Max was saying, doing something for the fun of it or doing something because it fulfills you. Work is essentially selling your time for an economic incentive and reward, okay? Selling your labor, okay, we get it. Now, the claim is that there's a structural badness of work. And let's read that claim. So the claim goes like this. The labor market in most developed countries has settled into an equilibrium pattern that makes work very bad for many people. That is getting worse as a result of technical and institutional changes. And that is very difficult to reform or improve in such a way as to remove its bad-making properties. Now we can talk about 5 properties, and let's take a look at them. 5 properties that make work structurally bad, okay, inherently bad. A system that rewards you for your labor. First is, and we'll look at 3 of these in detail, but here are the 5 sort of. The problem of dominating influence, the problem of distributive injustice, the problem of fissuring and precarity, and the problem of temporal colonization. Of course, the problem of unhappiness and dissatisfaction. I'm saying this whole thing is taking a long time, so I don't think I'll talk about all 3 that I planned. Let's just look at maybe some of them without reading this whole text. The problem of domination, I brought here a really interesting text that sort of describes living under... Okay, let's read this one, and then the next one we'll skip. Imagine a government Now, this is describing sort of life under the communist regime. That's what the text tells us, okay? Let's see how they understand it. Imagine a government that assigns almost everyone a superior whom they must obey. Although superiors give most inferiors a routine to follow, there's no rule of law. Orders may be arbitrary and can change at any time without prior notice or opportunity to appeal. Superiors are unaccountable to those they order around. They are neither elected nor removable by their inferiors. Inferiors have no right to complain about how they are being treated, except in a few narrowly defined cases. They also have no right to be consulted about the orders they are given. There are multiple ranks in the society ruled by this government. The content of the orders people receive varies depending on their rank. Higher ranked individuals may be granted considerable freedom in deciding how to carry out their orders and may issue some orders to inferiors. The most highly ranked individuals takes no orders but issues many, so the top of the pyramid. The lowest rank may have their bodily movements and speech minutely regulated for most of the day. And of course, the crux of the argument, this is not actually about the communist regime, this is about the life of a laborer in a factory, right? So that's sort of the gimmick of this text, but that's what it is. It's trying to ply out the idea that when you sell your labor for money, you're working under these tyrannical and dominating conditions. And here's just one modern day example of this. If we look at the factory of Amazon, right, and how they distribute their wares, here's an inside article that was conducted on working in one of these factories. And let's see the conditions. Workers who pick up products for delivery at a warehouse in Staffordshire, UK, use bottles instead of the actual toilet, which is located too far away. They are afraid of being disciplined for idling and losing their jobs as a result if they go to the bathroom. The warehouse resembles a prison or an airport with high security scanners that check workers for banned items like hoodies, sunglasses, and phones, and other employees who pat down workers to check for stolen goods. This is life as a worker in a warehouse by Amazon today. I'm not talking about 100 years ago, right? So now that we heard that communist sort of image of life as a worker, this is what they're referring to. Being constantly monitored, being humiliated, being dominated to the point where you have to go to the bathroom in a bottle because you're too scared to run to the toilet for losing your job. Okay, so that was the problem of dominating influence. And sort of there are these other problems, I'm not going to read the text here, we'll skip through them, I'll just explain them. So fissuring means essentially privatization. It means splitting up companies into small pieces. So imagine that in the past, one company would control all the aspects of its workers, providing the food they eat, the transportation, the means of work. And so fissuring is that phenomena that is very, very common today of splitting up the work into many, many subsidiary companies. And that creates a problem of precarity also, where our work is unstable often. We often have only temporary work. And this is what's known as the gig economy, right? This has been emerging throughout the last 20, 30 years, where job becomes less and less stable, right? And we are incentivized to have these types, imagine like this Just Eat and Uber, all these jobs where you're not an employee of the company actually. The company is only mediating between you and the client. So this way you don't deserve any benefits, you don't deserve any social security, and so on and so forth. And we're seeing millions of people being subject to lack of stability, to constant surveillance, and to less and less pay. Okay, so these are sort of the reasons why we are struggling with this. Then I brought some statistics here. Again, we'll skip this a bit to get to the examples, which are more interesting. So this is from the World Survey on Worker Satisfaction. They do this every year, and here are just a few statistics. 44% worldwide employees say that they are stressed at work, at a high level of stress, right? So we're seeing extreme stress conditions. We're seeing that 59% of workers today around the world are considered quiet quitting. So they're unsatisfied with their work, they're working at a slower pace than they should, they find lack of satisfaction. And then a final issue that I brought was that over half of employees actively or passively are job seeking. So even though you have a job, 51% of people working are constantly looking for the next thing to do. And that was sort of to bring about why we think work should be eliminated, and sort of all these conditions together. Now this of course brings another discussion question, and that's the big question that we've been sort of touching on, and now our examples should answer this. Will the automation of certain bureaucratic, mundane jobs result in the liberation of workers from alienating labor, or propel them towards even worse jobs? You want to say a few words on this? That's right. So the fear is, and I think a lot of you touched on that with your comments, is that even if we remove the jobs, that doesn't necessarily promise the utopia, right, that we were thinking about. The outcome of that could be, it could develop in a lot of different ways, where we go from, as you said, that was a great example, I think, from flipping the burgers to just cleaning the robot that flips the burgers, right, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's look at one case study, and hopefully we'll have enough time to look at the second case study as well, and we'll look at data work. And why did I choose data work? Because this is sort of a new type of job that came on the market, related directly to the creation of large language models and machine vision systems, okay? In order to do that, what is the basic issue we've talked about throughout this entire semester? We've said again and again and again, data, data, data. There's huge amounts of data, and yet the machine learns weird things from the data that we can't anticipate or that we can't learn ourselves. And that means that we need a whole factory of human beings behind the scenes to help the machine understand what is good data versus what is bad data. So essentially what we need is to train the machines, right? And you see teachers here training, we've become the teachers of the machine. And sort of what we're going to do now is look at that process of teaching the machine, right? And how that works. And these types of workers are known as data workers. And what they have to do is they have to do categorization of different kinds of artifacts or items. In this case, this is a computer vision categorization in which we are looking at this picture. This picture would be sent to you, and you would have to tag, just like you do on Facebook, every single image you see so that the machine or that the algorithm can learn what is what. So we have to signal this is a traffic light, this is a person, this is a handbag, this is a car, this is a truck, and so on and so forth. And we have to have millions and millions and millions of these examples for the machine to recognize the pattern. And what happens is that these big companies like OpenAI, like Microsoft, like Google, they outsource these processes. And they outsource them to vulnerable communities, to minorities in Africa, in South America, in different kinds of Southeast Asia, and so on and so forth. So let's see a few of these examples of how that work takes place. So first of all, we're going to look at the big picture. Then we'll look at RLHF, which means reinforcement learning by human feedback. That's today the most common method to teach a system. And finally, we'll look at the data workers themselves. And what I brought here are excerpts from an article that sort of does a deep dive on the working conditions of these people. So let's look first at the big picture. Much of the public response to language models like OpenAI's ChatGPT has focused on all the jobs they appear poised to automate. But behind even the most impressive AI system are people, huge numbers of people labeling data. They are data labelers to train it and clarifying data when it gets confused. Only the companies that can afford to buy this data can compete, and that's why we have sort of these huge conglomerates, right? Like there are only a very small number of companies that can actually create these algorithms and these very, very huge complex systems and train them, right? Because it's very, very cost exorbitant. And those that get it are highly motivated to keep it secret, so it's not shared, it's not open sourced. The result is that with few exceptions, little is known about the information shaping these systems' behaviors. Okay. You might miss this if you believe AI is a brilliant thinking machine. But if you pull back the curtain even a little, it looks more familiar as the latest iteration of a particularly Silicon Valley division of labor, in which the futuristic gleam of new technologies hides a sprawling manufacturing apparatus. Huge amounts of people are doing these labelings, and very few people are earning the money off of this, right? So let's see a few examples of that. Here's a similar example. This was from an article in Life that talks about something similar, and let's see the big picture there. The work was vital for OpenAI. This is because the AI had been trained on hundreds of billions of words scraped from the internet, a vast repository of human language. That huge training data set was the reason for GPT-3's impressive linguistic capabilities, but was also perhaps its biggest curse, since parts of the internet are replete with toxicity and bias. How do we create content moderation, right, of the huge, vast amount of data? OpenAI took a leaf out of the playbook of social media companies like Facebook, who had already shown it was possible to build AIs that could detect toxic language, like hate speech, to help remove it from their platforms. The premise was simple. Feed an AI with labeled examples of violence, hate speech, and sexual abuse, and that tool could learn to detect those forms of toxicity. The detector would be built into ChatGPT to check whether it was echoing the toxicity. So in order for the system to be able to see the bad text, it first has to learn what is good and what is bad text. To get those labels, OpenAI sent tens of thousands of snippets of text to an outsourcing firm in Kenya, beginning in November 2021. Much of that text appeared to have been pulled from the darkest recesses of the internet. Some of it described situations in graphic details like child sexual abuse, bestiality, murder, suicide, torture, self-harm, and incest. Now, the labelers have to sift through these snippets 8, 10, 12 hours a day and catalog whether these are good or bad text. And let's see the experience that these data labelers had in their work. So for that, we have to see the RLHF, right? Reinforcement learning through human feedback. We need human feedback. So let's see an example. Over the past 6 months, I spoke with more than 24 annotators from around the world. And while many of them were training cutting-edge chatbots, just as many were doing the mundane manual labor required to keep AI running. These are people classifying the emotional content of TikTok videos, new variants of email spam, and the precise sexual provocativeness of online ads. In order for any type of machine learning system to identify whatever the target is, it first has to learn. So it has to be taught. Others are looking at credit card transactions and figuring out what sort of purchases they relate to, or checking e-commerce recommendations. All different industries need this type of reinforcement learning. Humans are correcting customer service chatbots, listening to Alexa requests, and categorizing the emotions of people on video calls. Every single industry, I brought all these examples just so you see the great variety of issues that need this type of labeling. Earlier this year, I signed up for Scale AI's remote tasks. So here's an example of the actual work in action. The process was straightforward. After entering my computer specs, internet speed, and some basic contact information, I found myself in the training center to access a paying task. I first had to complete an associated unpaid intro course. Okay, the training center displayed a range of courses with inscrutable names like Glue Swimsuit and Poster Macadamia. I clicked on something called GFD chunking, which revealed itself to be labeling clothing in social media photos. Why all these weird names? What's going on here? It's actually, they're trying to hide the identity of the employer. Okay? They don't want the employee to know who they're working for. So you are working for this platform, but you have no idea where GFD chunking is actually doing. In this case, it was a clothing label. So it might be some kind of fashion industry mogul who wants a new AI system to discern which photographs are better for his magazine. But for you, it's GFD chunking, okay, as a worker. Now, the instructions were odd. For one, they basically consisted of the same directions reiterated in the idiosyncratically colored and capitalized typography of a collage bomb threat. So you know those bomb threats letters that come with the different letters from magazines where they cut them? This is how he felt when reading the instructions for what to do. Do label items that are real and can be worn by humans or are intended to be worn by real people. Let's see more examples. That's the first instruction. All items below should be labeled because they are real and can be worn by real-life humans. It reiterated above photos of an Air Jordan's ad, someone in Kylo Ren helmet, and mannequins in dresses, over which was a lime green box explaining once again, do label real items that can be worn by real people. So it's giving you examples of what you need to label. But let's see how it becomes a bit confusing. I skimmed to the bottom of the manual where the instructor had written in the large bright red font equivalent of grabbing someone by the shoulders and shaking them, the following items should not be labeled because a human could not actually put or wear any of these items. Above a photo of C-3PO, Princess Jasmine from Aladdin, and a cartoon shoe with eyeballs. Okay, so now we understand the instructions, feeling confident in my ability to distinguish between real clothes that can be worn by real people and not real clothes that cannot, I proceeded to the test. Right away, it threw an ontological curveball, a picture of a magazine depicting photos of women in dresses. Is a photograph of clothing real clothing? No, I thought, because a human cannot wear a photograph of clothing, right? Well, apparently wrong. As far as AI is concerned, photos of real clothes are real clothes. Next came a photo of a woman in a dimly lit bedroom taking a selfie before a full-length mirror. The blouse and shorts she's wearing are real. What about their reflection? Do we need to label the reflection of the clothes or not? Also real. Reflections of real clothes also are real clothes, apparently, according to the AI system. Yada, yada, yada. Here are many more examples. Do not label open suitcases. Do label shoes, but do not label flippers. Do label leggings, but do not label tights. Do not label towels, even if someone is wearing it. Label costumes, but do not label armor, and so on and so on and so on. The manual consisted of 43 pages of what do's and do nots, okay? So you're seeing a lot of confusing instructions, and soon we'll see what is the payout for this work that can take hours and hours and hours just to learn how to even begin the labeling process. Here's another example of RLHF, again, about content abuse. So documents reviewed by Time showed that OpenAI signed 3 contracts worth about $200,000 in total with Sama. Around 36 workers were split into 3 teams, one focusing on each subject. 3 employees told Time they were expected to read and label between 150 and 250 passages of text per 9-hour shift. Those snippets could range from 100 words to well over 1,000. All of the 4 employees described the work being mentally scarring, okay? And now let's see why. In the day-to-day work of data labeling in Kenya, sometimes edge cases would pop up. A Sama employee was at work reading an explicit story about Batman's sidekick, Robin, being raped in a villain's lair. The beginning of the story makes clear that the sex is non-consensual. But later, after a graphically detailed description of penetration, Robin begins to reciprocate. The Sama employee tasked with labeling the text appeared confused by Robin's ambiguous consent and asked OpenAI researchers for clarification about how to label the text. Should the passage be labeled as sexual violence or not? Now imagine that you are tasked 9 hours a day to read sexually explicit content about rape, child mutilation, and whatever other horrors you can imagine. This is your job every day, all day long. And now let's see the compensation that you're getting for this task. And we'll see the types of workers that work in it. Most of the work on remote tasks is paid at a piece rate, with a single task earning anywhere from a few cents to several dollars. It means you're paid by each task that you fulfill. Okay? Because tasks can take seconds or hours, wages are hard to predict. When remote tasks first arrived in Kenya, annotators said it paid relatively well, averaging about $5 to $10 per hour, depending on task. But the amount fell as time went on. According to workers I spoke with and job listening, US-based remote task annotators generally earn between $10 and $25 per hour. So if depending on where you're located in the world, you're getting a different type of salary for the same job. Okay? So some subject matters can be expected more. By the beginning of this year, pay for the Kenyan annotator I spoke with had dropped to between $1 and $3 per hour. So the more annotators there are, the less you need to be paid. Basic capitalism. When they were making any money at all, right? Because remember, the most common complaint about remote task work is its variability. It's steady enough to be a full-time job for long stretches, but too unpredictable to rely on. Annotators spend hours reading instructions, remember the 43-page manual, and completing unpaid trainings only to do a dozen tasks and then have the project end. So you spend hours and hours learning, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that, only to do a project that earns you, $15, let's say. And then the project disappears. On the other hand, that same project could have run for 3 months. Complete unpredictability, you don't know in advance what you're signing up for, and you're competing with other people who are simultaneously finishing these tasks. It's a race. Whoever finishes the task first gets paid. It's as simple as that. Any task could be their last, and they never know when the next one will come. So a task could come today, and then a project could end for the next 3 weeks, and then a new project begins. Because work appears and vanishes without warnings, taskers always need to be on alert. Victor has found that projects pop up very late at night, so he's in the habit of waking every 3 hours or so to check his queue. When a task is there, he'll stay awake as long as he can to work. Once he stayed up 36 hours straight labeling elbows and knees and heads in photographs of crowds. He has no idea why. So he doesn't know who he's working for, he doesn't know what's the purpose of this job, but he wakes up every 3 hours in the night in order to see if the next job came in, and then stays up 36 hours straight to do the job. They're stayed in isolation. They have to sign non-disclosure agreements not to explain what they're working for and who they're working for. They work only at home, and they're not allowed to share information about their work. What does that mean? It's creating an atmosphere of isolation, little work, and alienation from our work. We have no idea what is the use of this work that I'm doing. The next example is more or less the same. You see making $1.32 per hour after tax, raising to as high as $1.44. So we're seeing very exploitative stuff. Oh, here, this example was actually good. While on the contract, OpenAI was paying $12.50 to Sama for the work. So Sama, the company, was receiving $12.50, while the annotators were receiving $1.32 or $1.44. All the rest of the money was going for overhead, essentially. Okay, so that's the disparity of it. And what does this create for us? Well, it creates an exploitative environment we talked about. It creates a harmful atmosphere, isolation, mental health problems. But this is the type of emerging jobs that we can expect with AI. Again, one example. I'm sure there are several other wonderful examples, but here's one type of work that is being produced. And what is our takeaway message from here? This is all piecework. It's a gig economy, right? It doesn't give you a stable income. Of course, the top designers at OpenAI will have stable job, right? And they're earning salaries of about $1 million a year. Excellent. How many of those are there? A few hundreds? Maybe a few thousands at best? Whereas hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands are doing this job, right? Okay, how does that make us feel? What do we think? Look at the next example, and then we'll have time for a few more questions. So we do have enough time to talk about the third issue, which I wanted to. And this is about a book that I like very much. It talks about the trucking industry and sort of Karen Levy, who wrote this book, a researcher. And she talks about sort of how surveillance and AI systems are being integrated in this really, really masculine type of environment and work that is essentially being described as a sweatshop on wheels. So trucking industry is a very, very difficult industry, low paid, very exploitative in terms of working conditions, and very difficult both physically and mentally to spend 8, 9, 10 hours a day in a truck and then sleep inside the car and continue the next day and so on and so forth. So it's very exhausting. And yet we're seeing these systems being slowly integrated in there. And how does that take effect? Now I brought this as an example to show sort of how AI systems are being integrated into existing jobs, but shifting completely the type of balance that existed for a long time and recreating this type of work. So a typical question that you'll see in this industry is, can you tell this driver's tired, right? Well, we can, says the tech company. If we install certain types of systems within your truck, we will be able to monitor and improve safety. Now, I didn't bring this question. I don't remember who wrote it, but one of you mentioned sort of this idea that what is the trade-off, or what is the limit to which we say, well, this is invasive versus this ensures safety, right? Because we don't want people to fall asleep behind the wheel. We don't want car crashes, right? And then again, at what point is it too far? When do we cross that line, sort of? Is this okay or not okay? So let's look at a few examples. What's happened in the US is that they've implemented a system known as an electronic logging device, okay? And this has to be implemented in every single truck, okay, by law. And this logging device supposedly only logs the amount of hours in which you're driving. But de facto, it does a lot more than that, right? It logs certain patterns of behavior of the individual. It has GPS installed in it so that the company can track continuously where its vehicles are, at what time, how long the driver's been on the road, what kind of traffic conditions and weather conditions are there, and so on and so forth. And this is reshaping this industry in 3 simple ways. If we talk about how electronic monitoring reconfigures information flows, the 3 examples that Levy discusses are aggregation, exclusivity, and temporality. And I brought us a few examples just to understand what that means. So by aggregation, what I mean is this. When fleet management systems are used to monitor truck drivers' work, aggregated information comes to supplant road knowledge. Individual, local, and biophysical self-knowledge gleaned from years of experience in terms of value to the firm. So instead of relying on traditional types of value, I need an experienced worker, I want someone behind the wheel who knows what he's doing, right? We're seeing a shift from taking that personal experience of the worker towards an aggregation of what are the conditions necessary in which we exchange the road knowledge for technological knowledge. I don't need your knowledge of the roads. I have a GPS, right? I don't need some expert who understands when an engine isn't working. I have a sensor in the engine that can tell me. So what's happening is that we're shifting from typical knowledge structures to an aggregation knowledge structure. And this is changing the dynamics of work within the company or within this industry completely. Traditionally, truckers' value and a good deal of their occupational identity arises directly from their deep knowledge of the daily ins and outs of driving a truck, from how trucking equipment works and how to fix it quickly when needed, to local conditions that affect their work. Road knowledge serves as a crucial source of both economic and cultural value for these workers. We have around 2 million truck drivers in the US, right? And probably around the world the number is higher. And what we're seeing is that a lot of these people build their identity. Remember, you talked about that often, that the workplace is where I find fulfillment. The workplace is a part of who I am. It's my community. The analysis that Levy offers us is to explain that a lot of these workers find meaning by the excellence of their knowledge, by their experience. You know, I'm a good driver. I know all the roads. I can provide for my family. This masculine identity, which is coupled in there because it's a 96% masculine occupation. So it's very, very masculine in both in statistics and in culture. And what we're seeing is by implementing these systems, we're removing an essential aspect that gave a feeling of fulfillment to these workers. So we're not exactly replacing the workers by an AI system. We're just taking away the meaning of the work from them. We're turning it into a form of menial labor. Anyone can do it. And if anyone can do it, why should I pay better salaries to someone with a lot of experience? No, I'll take the 16-year-old. Anyone can do it. I don't need to value you as a long-term employee. In essence, what we're seeing here is that transition. So that's about aggregation and comparisons of information about multiple drivers gleaned from afar. A driver may state that a road is currently impassable due to weather conditions, an assertion that would previously have been difficult to challenge. But using aggregated data, his dispatcher may respond that I know the weather is not too bad for you to continue driving I-80 because I see that I have 4 other trucks on the road. Not only is it the experience that we're taking away, the monitoring capabilities removes the autonomy from that job in many senses. So again, the meaning that you found in your work, the sense of being a important employee with experience, a person who knows how to do it, now also is being constantly challenged by every decision they make. Because with these aggregation and surveillance methods, I can sort of find the ideal solution in that situation as the computer shows me. No, the weather's not too bad. You need to keep driving. And this goes on in many different ways. So let's see this exclusivity of information that comes up. So here's some illuminating issues. A second dimension of change concerns who possesses valuable information. When monitoring systems are used, truckers are no longer the sole holders of relevant knowledge, as fleet management systems distribute it to remote dispatchers. Truckers themselves still possess knowledge of their work activities, but they're no longer its exclusive possessors. So again, we're not automating the job, we're simply changing the dynamics. And remember labor conditions. As less important as you are, as less knowledge or special features that you can provide, your status as a worker becomes weaker. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily this is good or bad. We'll talk about some upsides to this, right? It creates a lot of benefits in a sense. More safety, as we said in the beginning. What we need to understand is that this emerging technology is sort of changing the balance within the workplace. So a fear that we have to have is not simply that AI will take over our jobs or that we will be replaced, but rather that what is meaningful, the autonomy we find, the sense of fulfillment, the ability to control my own work, that is what's being removed from the job. That's what's being taken away. The ship captain model, this model in which the driver is sort of an independent worker like a ship on the sea, right? Like a captain in the sea. A driver may declare authoritatively that he is too fatigued to drive. But when the driver's hours of service are monitored by a fleet management system, a dispatcher may respond to the effect that, I know you aren't too tired because I can see that you've only been on duty for 5 hours. Now, okay, again, I have an employee. I want to make sure my employee works the proper amount of hours, right? That's not so bad. Nevertheless, it's changing the dynamics here. Now, let's look at a few examples. We'll skip forward as to these new types of monitoring systems that are being deployed here. And they're used to create, I'll skip it. Okay, here we go. Oh, this is not so interesting. This is what I wanted to show. Okay, so not only are these monitoring systems being implemented within the vehicle itself, we're having this cyborg vision that we talked about before come to real life in this specific industry, right? So this is sort of a picture of a spaceman cyborg. This is imaginary, right? That it'll improve the life of the space traveler and so on and so forth. And sort of, okay, this is the depiction of it. We can skip that. What I wanted to show is the sort of homage that they did about the truck driver. So they took that image, and this is sort of the truck driver vision of it, where there's a radar GPS headgear, there's an eyeball monitor, there's an infrared goggles, there's a heart rate indicator, there's steering stimulators, left and right leg shockers, robo trucks, on and off. So all of these wearable devices to ensure that you are doing your job properly. And let's see some examples of real life things that are being used. So here's the smart cap. It is a baseball cap that detects fatigue by monitoring the driver's brain waves. Okay, so it's constantly running like an EKG or an EEG. Rear view safety and forward safe car cap are similar systems. Systems like these can be configured to send an alert to a fleet manager or family member, to flash lights in driver's eyes, to sound alarms, or to jolt the wearer back to alertness with vibrations. The cap sits on your head, and it sort of makes sure that you're aware of your surrounding, that you're not falling asleep. Okay, this is being implemented today, and here's an example. Similar devices are used by high-speed train conductors in China to monitor workers' stress level and emotional spikes, right? So it's not just whether you're awake or not. Let's see how stressed you're feeling, and we collect all that data, of course. Here's another nice example called OptAlert. An Australian company, that's relevant to a lot of you, manufactured a pair of glasses that monitors the speed and duration of a trucker's blinks in order to give him a real-time fatigue score. So we're monitoring the retinal movement, and according to how many times you're blinking, we know how tired you become. And then we can rank the workers, who is the most awake throughout time. And then these companies, I skipped that part, but the part before shows that they're incentivizing these fleets to post the scores of the drivers. And they're saying this will motivate the drivers to do better. It will show who is too tired for work, who has the best mileage, who has the best gas consumption, and so on. Another example, Maven Machine's Copilot headset detects head movement that suggests the driver is distracted, for example, looking down at a phone, or tired, for example, failing check his side view mirrors regularly. So now not only is it checking your brain waves, there's a camera sitting in front of you in the vehicle, and it's checking whether you're properly holding the steering wheel, whether you're checking your mirrors. And again, remember, all these things can be sold as something good. We want safe drivers, we want less accidents. The question is, what type of reality are we creating for these people now? Yes, please. So a lot of interviews in the book discuss similar ideas, where the drivers are talking on the one side, I'm not a child, I don't want to be treated as a child, I know my own body, I have control over myself, I should be treated as an adult who's responsible. And on the other side, really, be incentivized of the company to sort of transition from a labor-focused market to a data-driven one. If the driver is the important piece in the puzzle, the drivers have all the power. The companies want the data to be in charge. How quick, how much gas, how much miles per hour. A chart that I skipped was to monitor the gas versus miles used for every driver. They create rankings, and then they post which driver had the best speed efficiency over the last month. And they incentivize the drivers by giving them perks. So you get a bonus if you have this kind of result. Another funny example they gave, the bonus wasn't sent to the employee, it was sent to the driver's wife in her name. And the idea is to get the family involved. They want to motivate the wife. Remember, I said 96% male workers, right? They want to motivate the wife to get used to receiving perks. And so to be supportive of the husband, right, in a sense. Okay, let's look at one more example here. This one I liked. Why can't, and this was attached to this picture, is the irony of it, right? Why can't we produce boots for the right foot that shock the driver if he or she applies too much or too little pressure on the gas pedal? And how about some gloves that create a small burn if the driver's hands don't remain in the correct position on the steering wheel? While we're at it, can we get a helmet that tracks a driver's thoughts and produces a stinging sensation if he or she begins thinking about anything other than driving? So this is not real, right? That is sort of the cynical analogy of this idea of the robo-trucker, they're called. And the question is, on the one hand, we want to create safety conditions. On the other hand, we are creating these technological solutions that are demeaning, humiliating, and often removing what it was that gave us meaning for that job. So the danger is not just that our jobs will disappear. The danger is that we will be created horrible jobs anyway that no one wants to do, that scar us mentally and that are unreliable in terms of income, or that we transition our existing jobs into unbearable works that become sort of technological sweatshops on wheels in this sense. Okay, let's take a few comments. There's sort of a message that I've tried to consistently give throughout this class, is that when we think about AI, we are not necessarily looking at a new phenomena, right? We're looking at a new type of technology that creates same old types of changes at different degrees and levels. And the underlying message of that is that technology is never neutral. Technology is always value-laden in a sense. It always creates a new form of reality. And once that new form of reality is embedded in society, it's very difficult to change. So the point is, we don't need to hate AI. I always say that. I'm a lover of AI. I think this is incredible. The point is to do it right. The point is to think about the ethical implications in advance, to design it holistically and socially so that we can really enjoy the benefits of it. And that means not going down necessarily this capitalistic overview, right, image of completely maximizing profits, but thinking of these uses in many different ways. And the problem, of course, is, and what I'm very concerned with, is that those actors who are developing this technology and deploying this technology don't have our best interests at heart, right? And so we should be very concerned about that, not about the technology itself, which is, in of itself, very problematic. It's not neutral, as I said, but it has to be addressed socially. It has to be addressed holistically. And that's why we're trying to raise awareness about this and discuss it. Okay, never mind. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great week, and I'll see you all next time.